Got it.
I'm going to kick us off and get us started. Welcome everyone. Really glad that you're here for session 3 out of 6 sessions on community and stakeholder engagement. This is our year 2 learning collaborative presented by the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence. My name is Nell Hurley. I am coming to you from St. Paul, Minnesota. I'm a person in long-term recovery, and I'm a member of the steering committee of the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence. And I'm really excited to be with you today. And alongside Chris Kelly from the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence, I'm going to do just a Cindy Christie also. Thank you for being here and backing us up on technology and all the logistics. I'll introduce today's presenter in just a moment, but first I'm going to just cover a little bit of information about the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence, kind of how we're structured and what we do. I'm gonna do a little bit of housekeeping and just share a couple of slides with you. My screen just went black. Is that happening to anyone else?
Yeah. No.
Share screen went black.
There it is, Coby. You're good. Thanks. I didn't have to do anything.
Coby, can you move us to the next slide? Yes. Okay. So the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence is funded by SAMHSA. This is just a little bit about our grant funder, SAMHSA. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but we are in year 2 of a 4-year grant. The Peer Recovery Center of Excellence, you can go to the next slide, Coby, is a pretty incredible initiative that we're very lucky to have and have it funded by SAMHSA. We are a remote team that is supported by a team out of the University of Kansas City in Missouri. And then we also have staff from University of Texas at Austin and University of Madison, Wisconsin. There's 4 core areas of focus within the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence. The first one is clinical integration of peer support workers into non-traditional settings like, hospitals, public libraries, nonprofit organizations, places in the community outside of the more traditional places where you might see peer workers. So that's a really important piece of the work of the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence. The second area of focus is around building and strengthening the capacity of recovery community organizations. And Chris Kelly and I work in this area of focus. And this learning collaborative is a part of that core area too. Then we focused on enhancing the professionalization of peers through workforce development so that peers are adequately paid and supervised and supported as part of a really important piece of the workforce. And then the last area of focus is providing evidence-based toolkits and resource information to diverse stakeholders. There's more information about all 4 of these areas on our website, which is peerrecoverynow.org. So you can look there for more information or follow up with either me or Chris or Cindy, and we'd be happy to tell you more about the center or any of those areas. This slide is just a little bit about language. If we want addiction destigmatized, we need a language that's unified. The words we use matter. Caution needs to be taken, especially when the disorders concerned are heavily stigmatized as heavily stigmatized as substance use disorders are. There's a link down in the bottom right corner of this slide. Maybe Cindy, if you could put that in the chat, that would be great. There's a directory there for addiction and recovery language. And next slide, just a little bit of housekeeping. We'd love to see your faces. If you can keep your cameras on, that would be great. Today's event is being recorded. Please keep your line muted when you're not speaking, just to cut down on background noise. And then you can use the chat and reaction features throughout the training. Feel free to ask questions and respond to the content being presented as Coby is presenting. We really want this to be, I mean, Coby's an expert and he's gonna present some great information, and he'll be sort of teaching and guiding all of us, but we want to learn from you as well. We want to hear about your experiences. So please let this be interactive and chime in if you have comments or questions along the way. So here we go. We have Coby Williams with us from New Reach Community Consulting. And Coby, I'm going to let you kind of introduce yourself a little bit more, but we're very fortunate to have Coby with us today. He's going to be talking about mobilizing the community. And Coby, I will let you take it away from there.
Yes, thank you so much, Nell, for the cue up there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Coby Williams. I'm the owner and founder of New Reach Community Consulting. New Reach is a small business based in Columbus, Ohio, that provides public affairs consulting services to really help organizations connect with communities for important causes. And I am really passionate about social impact. That's what New Reach is specifically focused on. And for me, social impact is really a fancy or a pretty word to describe how to change, improve, maybe even save lives. And oftentimes that's dealing with a lot of the ugly or icky things in society, which I fully lean into and embrace addressing. And to that point, very proud to say that New Reach is a B Corp certified small business, which is the international gold standard for making a difference with social impact. So I'm all about not only this topic, but this topic to actually have outcomes and impact, long-term outcomes and impact. And I've been involved in this space, this type of work in some way, form, shape, or fashion for 30 plus years now. So pretty much pick the decade, excluding the 80s. I was still playing with G.I. Joes and Transformers, but certainly into the 90s have been really knee deep in this work, and very, very pleased to be with you all. And as Neil said, I encourage us to be interactive. I learn just as much as you all do. And particularly on this topic, I believe that, education and change should happen at the speed of community. New things come up, new information, new things to really learn and absorb. So definitely want this to be as interactive as possible. And I also encourage candor. That's something that's kind of just my style. That's New Reach's style as well. So that this is a safe space for us to have those conversations on this topic. And with that, I'll jump in here about our topic for our time together, which is mobilizing the community. I'll kind of start by saying if you have not participated in the previous sessions, or if, whether they be live or if you haven't checked out those recordings, certainly encourage you to do so. A lot of these topics, they build upon one another. However, just the nature of the work is not truly sequential. So they're presented kind of in a linear fashion, but absolutely are sequential and build upon one another. So to that point, the session that I presented previously was on social change spectrum. And I did not, last second, did not include the slide because in the interest of time, and also to tease, if you have not already seen that content, to go and check that out, and maybe even check it out again once you, as we, you are exposed to today's content. So the social change spectrum covered, depending on your source, between 5 to 7-ish different categories of what social change can look like. And it covered direct service, it covered self-help, it covered education, advocacy, public interest, and direct action. What you have in front of you is the pie chart of a movement, or sometimes called a social movement ecology. You can kind of layer them on top of one another in some ways. In some ways, this is an additional level of specificity. So that's why I really opened up with the spectrum, which is, or categories of the work. This ecology is more specifically kind of the interrelationship between engagement with communities and kind of why you want to engage with communities. So that's, there you can overlap them, but there's a kind of additional layer of specificity. And with that, we have personal transformation in the yellow there, or to my left. I want to be cognizant of those who might be colorblind. There's, on the bottom portion, there's alternatives. And on the right-hand side of the pie, there is changing dominant institutions. I'll begin with just quick definitions, and we'd love to hear what you all might be familiar with and examples in your respective line of work or your organizations. So personal transformation is largely focused on kind of the individual level of what engagement looks like. It somewhat parallels direct service, which is on the spectrum of engagement. Some examples of personal transformation would be leadership development. It might be mentoring. It's kind of a onesie-twosie way of engaging people. And I also want to pause there and say, very similarly with the spectrum, there is no this versus that. That's not really the most helpful way to think about this. I kind of view this as it's kind of like a map. You go to an amusement park, it's a huge, tons of rides, and there's the map, you are here. If you're here, that means you're not over there, right? That's really how I think of this work. It doesn't mean that you can't go over to the roller coaster that's, 2 miles away. Maybe you'll go over there next. Maybe you're coming from there. That is fine. It's not a matter of this versus that. However, I am a fan of knowing where you are and where you aren't in a given time and moment. So again, personal transformation is kind of more individual level engagement. Let's move to, I'll go to alternatives next. Alternatives are ways to engage with a community or a system in ways that are kind of called off the grid. Some examples of that might be a credit union. So yes, you can go to a bank, PNC, Chase, depending on Fifth Third, different banks. A credit union is an example of, well, for whatever reason, a system or structure isn't working for us, for our community, for our people. So we're kind of going to do our own thing. We're going to, borrow some things that system might be doing, but we're going to remix it. We're going to make it work for us in our own way, in our own model. So again, kind of an off the grid way is a way to articulate that. Then I'll move to changing dominant institutions, which is the red portion of the pie, or towards the right hand of the pie chart. That oftentimes you'll see that area split into 3 different portions. So within changing dominant institutions, oftentimes you'll see that cut up into sections of mass mobilization, structure, organizing, and inside game. Again, you often will see that articulated as one section being mass mobilization, one section being structure, organizing, and the other being inside game, all specifically within the changing dominant institution. What mass mobilization means is pretty much a group of people in mass, somewhat informal, although I'll use that term loosely. They have some type of commonality. They come together to pretty much push for, demand, advocate for change. Some examples of that is pretty much it's a movement. Examples of that include the civil rights movement. I often say it's not of the 1960s, it's of the 1600s is when that began. Black Lives Matter, the women's suffrage movement, there's Occupy Wall Street. Those are some examples of what that could look like. The term and the sentiments itself of mass mobilization can be jarring for certain populations or groups. I shared during my previous time with you all is that oftentimes it's from a place of power or privilege. Movements, engagement, oftentimes, certainly the context that I'll be presenting information to you is to help address issues that are happening within a marginalized population or community. And there's different ways to describe that, but something is happening that you don't like and you want to change it. Each of the examples I gave also are populations that weren't popular. They were not popular whatsoever in the moment. Oftentimes it was in hindsight where folks were kind of late to the party and became more supportive of them. So that's something important to remember when it's specific to really that whole piece as a whole with changing dominant institutions. You probably won't be a fan favorite initially.
Coby,
yes.
Sorry, can I just jump in here real quick just to mention that the recovery advocacy movement is a great example of this. I mean, the recovery community nationally is sort of standing on the shoulders of some of these other movements like, HIV/AIDS and the civil rights movement. But yes, we have our own, sort of mass movement within the recovery community that fits right in with what you're talking about.
Thank you for that. And that's beautifully said. And one thing it's called changing dominant institutions. It means, again, a community or issue is marginalized. Various reasons for that. And you're coming together in mass because you're usually outnumbered, outgunned, out-resourced. That's the whole spirit behind a movement. So very, very well said.
Just one more little thing to add to that. I think that recovery community organizations in and of themselves would fall into kind of the alternatives, the definition of alternatives, because members of the recovery community, people who have suffered from substance use disorders and their families and their allies, started to sort of look around and say, the dominant institutions that are available to us aren't cutting it. So we're going to create recovery community organizations in a very grassroots, sort of way. So, yeah.
Well said. Well said. Thank you. And I'll touch on the two final within that section of the pie, and I'll open it up for comments, questions, reactions, or examples. Would love to hear others from others as well. So structure organizing, it's similar to the previous example I gave, which is mass mobilization. A key difference is that with structure organizing, it's usually a formal organization or system that is challenging, which in my world, that's a good word, that's a good thing to do. It's challenging something else or a dominant system. So again, it might be a formal organization. Examples that I provided before, some of those involve labor unions, civil rights groups. Nell gave some examples. RCOs might be involved in that. That's kind of the difference. Again, en masse might mean, it's kind of a motley crew in some ways of individuals, and the movement is kind of the star in some ways. And with structure organizing, it's literally a formal organization that is really conducting it. It can be some overlaps, certainly, but those are kind of the nuances between those two in particular. And then you have inside game, which is actually the topic that I'll be presenting next in a couple of months to go a bit more in depth with that. But inside game is really working within a system. Maybe you are, it could be political advocacy, which will be the specific topic that we'll talk about. It's how to nudge people or individuals that are within a system to do better for your issue. It's a way of really using influence or trying to gain power or influence within a system to help move it along. So those are the general descriptions of movement ecology. I would love to hear from you all any what resonates with you, or if you have any specific examples of that. And I'll before that, I'll say one final thing. So one question I was asked when I presented on the spectrum of engagement, and I'm paraphrasing, is can you be all things? My short answer is yes, but not at one time. Again, usually organizations really lean into, again, it's like a map. If you're here, you can't be over there. You can go over there, you can be coming from there. Sometimes it's, oh, we're smack in the middle. That's called hedging. Usually you're primarily in one area as opposed to the other. And we're talking about community engagement, right? I do a lot of engagement, sometimes surveys, needs assessments. Maybe an organization thinks that they are someplace and their funders don't agree with that. Their community doesn't agree with that. So point being is I'm big on knowing where you are, where you aren't, and that is fine, and that's okay. But oftentimes it's not usually accurate or credible to be smack dead in the middle. That's the whole point of a spectrum or an ecology, is that you fall someplace. And with that said, I would love to hear more from you all. Have you seen this before? Does it resonate with you? And maybe some examples of your work within any of those pieces of the pie there. And also I asked, Nell, Cindy, and Chris, if you could help me monitor the chat as well. I have a lot of screens and windows up, so I may miss some comments, but I welcome comments using the mic and or using the chat box.
Coby, I actually put a couple of things in the chat that I'm not totally sure about. So I'm wondering if you could confirm or deny. But I was trying to think about like an analogy for inside game. Mm-hmm. And I thought maybe an example of this would be like embedding peer support in treatment centers. Yeah. Would that?
I think that's a really good example. And the term, like I'm a nerd and I love history, so I'm going to use a phrase that usually gets misused, but a Trojan horse. Yeah. That is kind of an example of getting people, maybe within a system, they're on your team, they're on your side, there's supportive of your issue, and you help nudge them, or that person or those individuals help nudge the system along from within. So I do think that's a good analogy or example.
Yeah, thank you. I also, I'm thinking back to like one of the reasons why we wanted to offer this topic, this as our overall learning collaborative in year 2 is, well, partly because the recovery community told us when we did a deep dive needs assessment in year 1, asking RCOs, what is it that you want support around in terms of building capacity. And they said one of the things that really rose to the top was the community and stakeholder engagement, but also just the importance of ensuring like authenticity of voice within the community, and the importance of not working in silos, like we're, it's so easy to get siloed within like social services and in the addiction recovery field. And so creating, like connecting with the community, like that's what this is all about, this like community and stakeholder engagement. And what does that mean? How and why do we as RCOs engage with the community? And so being on, coalitions and task force groups and, any way that you can sort of like get a seat at the table, and you don't have to be an expert in anything, but just like, this is, we are representing the recovery community. So I think that kind of folds in here. And to me, it sounds like inside game stuff, like collaborating with the other players in the system, like the Department of Justice or, the area hospitals or the policymakers. Does that sound right to you, Coby?
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. And I was just going to say, I want to be sensitive to how I frame this, because we're going to do a deeper dive into it, but policy advocacy, electoral advocacy, whatever, your term you might be more comfortable with, or exact examples of that. And we'll do deeper dives in that. All of those are examples of inside game. It doesn't necessarily have to be you, quite literally, and or, folks who are directly within an RCO. You might help place, people within those systems that are supportive and sympathetic to your cause. All of those are absolutely great examples and fair game.
Yeah, that's great. It looks like Michelle has her hand up. Michelle, do you want to come on in? Just unmute yourself and come on into the conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much. You might answer this later, so please feel free to say this is a later topic. But I'd love to hear kind of any thoughts or suggestions you may have if our organization is looking to help like mentor and place people on committees that they're interested in participating in, how to kind of prepare them for that opportunity and how to kind of provide guidance or support, because these spaces can often be sort of intimidating, especially if you're one or two peers out of a whole group of maybe providers or other stakeholders. So
Sure. I can give some kind of on the fly recommendations. One is to help set people up for success. So on one hand, people they're the expert of their experience, right? You might not be an expert on, how to serve on a board or parliamentary procedures or that's acquired. Those are things that can be learned, but to really honor and acknowledge that people are the experts of their experience, and that's the voice that they are bringing to the table. And it's more tactical things, but board orientation, or what does serving on a board, what does that entail? I know that Board Source is an excellent, I believe there's still a nonprofit that provides a lot of free information, be it PDFs and webinars, or, what does board service look like? A lot of, I know I'm based here in Ohio, a lot of here it's the Attorney General's office offers similar information, free 99. What does that service entail? And that's a lot of the brass tacks, nitty gritty stuff, but it can help people be more comfortable with that role, what that role looks like. They already know their experience, and I'm all for not minimizing that ever at all. That's one side of it. The other side oftentimes is comfort level with, well, how do I serve in that role? So those are some things top of mind that might be helpful, but lean into the experience and also help set up for success in terms of what does service look like, and advocate for those seats too. I know a lot of public sector organizations, that's a requirement of such, to have people who are of that community to be represented on it. Have people lined up, terms, they have finite periods of time, have your next 2-3 people lined up, don't have the excuse, oh, we couldn't find it. It happens, right? It happens. Those are just ways to kind of be more strategic, thoughtful, push for it, and have people in rotation immediately available to be in those. So that's a whole lot on the fly, but hopefully there's some value in that. Let me know if I didn't address that question.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Leo put a great comment in the chat. Leo, do you want to come off mute and read your comment or say more?
Hi there, you go ahead. If you need me for anything, I'll pop in, okay?
Okay. I love this. Leo wrote, addiction is like water. It's in everything, every organization, and specific to peer support, that's where the opportunity for growth will be. Peer means me too, and support means trust me. And I think that the challenge sometimes is, because Coby, you're absolutely right that it's, we are experts in our own experience. Yeah. As people with lived experience in addiction and recovery, that is, in my mind, that should be viewed as equal to a PhD. And as Chris would say, that it's not always valued by others. And so I don't know, maybe the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence should do, something more around this topic specifically, like how do we really communicate our value to, other entities or groups. We do have to kind of elbow our way to the table sometimes, and then own our value of, and there's lots of different ways that you can do it. I mean, it's very empowering to, I'm a person in recovery, and for me to be able to stand in that experience and say, I have been there and done that. And I know, where systems have failed me, and I know what has helped me, and here's my experience. It's worth something.
Yes.
But yes. You're right. It's not everyone might know how to talk about that or how to do it. There are messaging trainings out there. Faces and Voices of Recovery has one that really teaches people how to talk about their recovery story rather than focus on, the chaos of addiction. So there's different things like that, but Michelle, you've totally got my wheels turning here, and I'll get back to you if we, can take this further. So sorry, Coby.
No, that's
Thank
great.
you.
And yeah, you messaging. Yeah. And I will touch on some of that during our time today. High level, but any of these things we're talking about, like, and I do it all the time. They can be half-day sessions on it. It's all great stuff. Yeah. And what I always advise is don't just be a bullet point on an agenda. You are the expert in your experience. That's the lens that I offer for this topic, is that to push. Push, challenge, those aren't terms that I'm shy about. You oftentimes have to do that as a result of not being included. That's just, and the lens that I bring to engagement, that's what I'm all about. So yeah, don't just be a bullet point on an agenda. Something you'll almost never hear this from a consultant. My services are procured to do this, but I love it when a community, when I say community, I don't just mean a geographical location, a community of whatever, does their own survey or needs assessment. This is what we're the experts. You're going to come to us to find our peers, colleagues, friends anyway. This is what we've identified, and you bring that to an institution. I unfortunately rarely see that. I think it's beautiful when it happens. You don't, it won't be PhD level if it's not something you do every day. That's fine. That's okay. You still, you're the expert of your experience. You have the connections to bring that to fruition, and then it can get refined, later on. The example I gave of mass mobilization, oftentimes with movements, that's what they do. They're not necessarily experts in procedures, but they bring their expert of lived experience to light. So again, somewhat tactical, but that's an example of, bring your issue to the table. And again, I shared this during my time with you all last time. In my world, an issue is not a bad thing. An issue is a problem with a solution. So you'll hear me say issue a lot. In my world, it's not something to run away from. It's literally, it's what you're bringing to the table. Good stuff. I'm going to move on here and touch on what is the community organizing model. And again, the context of the content that I'll be presenting is it's community engagement. It's interesting, when I was coming up in this work, civic engagement was kind of the term. Community engagement wasn't really around. It wasn't the term. It existed, but it really wasn't a thing. And I think that civic engagement is much more passive. It's kind of not, it's planting flower gardens, merit and value to that. Community engagement is about movement. It's about issues. Again, it's a solution to a problem, of which community organizing is a piece of that. And this is just one of the methods of engagement. I won't spend too much time on this, but any questions that you have, I will entertain it. This slide that you're seeing here, as one example, spent an entire summer learning and doing it. So again, I will never do it justice with our time together, but I do want you to get exposed to it. I'll start with 101s, which is towards the right portion of the circle there. And shout out to this organization called PICO, based largely in the West Coast in California, which is a community organizing organization. One of several, but it's one of the more prominent, notable ones in the country. 101s are engaging with people to learn more about their issue. Again, their an issue, a problem with a solution. It's really connecting on that level. It's learning about their experience and starting to think through ways of how to really leverage that experience in a mutual beneficial way to solve the problem. Gross oversimplification, but that's really the core of organizing, is 101s. It's building relationships on that real level there. Oftentimes in my work or engagement, a lot of folks are like, oh, we had a cookout and we had, brought a lot of people into a room in a space. That is, in my mind, that's a means to an end. The 101 is a way that you can really further leverage that. So yeah, have the barbecue, have the cookout, have the whatever. That is a way to conduct 101s, as an example. Or you can follow up with people from there to do 101. So the event is not the thing. That's a means to an end. It's not the end itself, as an example of a kind of a practical application of 101s with what kind of commonly exists out in the space. And along the lines there, it says listen and share concerns. That's the point of a 101. Is it's saying, hey, I see you. We might have some things in common. What are some things that we might be able to do together to address this? And the range is long. Again, you can go check out that the previous one of the previous sessions, that recordings that gives examples of where you can kind of get in, where you fit in to kind of move that conversation along. Research is another step within the community organizing model. I just gave the example previously. Do your own needs assessment. That's a form of research. It doesn't have to be this peer-reviewed thing that's going to be on Harvard. It doesn't matter so much. That is a example of research, is bringing your issue to light. Cutting an issue, we'll touch on that in a few slides here, but it's really, again, a way to bring attention to your issue from the experts, which would be you all. Developing leaders, we kind of touched on that previously, various examples of doing that. And leadership does not always have to be out front. Leadership can take many different ways, maybe different shapes and forms, but it's how do you set people up for success with how they told you that they would like to be involved. So it's kind of, that's why you start with the one-on-ones. You don't just throw people out there. You really learn more about their concerns, their needs, their interests, and then you start to think through how can you further cultivate that. And then you have action. That's where you demonstrate power and accountability. It says for public officials, which is oftentimes the case because they're the decision makers, but it's really with any type of system. It can be education, it can be government, it can be a community, meaning a geographic location. It's something that has power and influence and resources and has more than you do. The point of organizing is that you're getting, a lot of people who don't have as much individual power or influence. You get together and that you can help move the needle and challenge things for the betterment of your cause or your community. And then you evaluate, you reflect all that. And this is an iterative process. This, it takes time, but that's kind of the robust way of going about it. That's a whole lot on a slide. Again, I spent literally an entire summer focused on just the stuff in this slide, but I want to pause for any comments, reactions, questions you might have with anything on this particular slide here.
I would love to offer a comment, I guess. I don't know if anyone here has seen the documentary film, The Anonymous People. Hopefully you have. It came out about 10 years ago now. So it's, so hopefully you have seen it, but there's a little part in the film where Carol McDade, who is a lobbyist she's a lobbyist for the addiction recovery field. And she also co-founded an RCO in Virginia called Miction Foundation. And she is in this little part in the film is talking about how and she works on Capitol Hill. She's in it every day, and she's been doing it for like 30 years. And she's talking about how there is a belief that people who suffer from substance use disorders don't vote. And this little piece about taking action and demonstrating power is so important and so huge. This is one of the reasons why recovery community organizations do things like get out the vote.
Yes.
Like it might seem like, what does that have to do with, addiction recovery? Well, it has everything to do with addiction recovery. I mean, this is like community organizing and mobilizing the community at its core. So it gets me a little bit on fire. So thank you, Coby. And then I'm just looking at the chat. Scott Curry, do you want to come off mute and walk us through your comment? If not, I can read it.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Yeah, hi everybody. I'm from the Mid-Hudson region in New York, and something over the last, 5 years, maybe even longer, each county has like an integrated providers meeting. So you can have all and any providers from the county level down to an outpatient. And we've created these groups of providers to exchange resources and talk about gaps that have been identified in the community. And then each group or each meeting has sub workforce groups where you have access to care, or there's actually a workforce group or street outreach. where you may have 3 to 5 members of that larger group working on smaller projects to help fill the gaps that have been identified in the larger group. And what I put in the chat is, so many times we hear people say, oh yeah, that's a great idea. Well, who's following up on it?
Yeah.
Right. We're just saying, oh, that's a great idea. We say that it's a great idea for 6 months. And meanwhile, we're losing people every day that could have benefited from putting the work in to create that resource or to fill in that gap. And those small workforce groups are crucial. And then I also said that making sure that peers, if you have peers in those agencies, that those peers are present in those meetings, because those are the people that are working one-on-one with the individuals that are expressing those concerns of resources or lack thereof. So peers have to have a voice in all or any collaborations that happen county or statewide.
Beautiful
Yes.
example. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, beautiful example, Scott. And I love, one of my favorite words is holding stakeholders accountable. And that includes everyone, right? That includes ourselves, who are pushing for issues. That includes quote unquote decision makers. That's all inclusive. And I encourage folks to really embrace that word. Particularly, we're usually talking about public institutions. It's public institution, right? It means it's supposed to be for everyone. That's kind of why they conceptually exist. And I often say that someone's going to get something, and it's usually the ones who ask for it sometimes the most or the loudest. Tons of analogies that closed mouths don't get fed, and as institutions, they exist to maintain a status quo, which isn't necessarily bad. You wouldn't want your local government to change its mind every day, right? So there's some value in status quo, however, not to the extent where it no longer serves you. So that's why accountability and actions and mobilization; those are all words that I embrace. And again, that's the lens that I bring this work to, because that's what makes a difference ultimately. And again, they're public institutions that exist to serve and be held accountable by the public. Any final questions or comments on this specific slide here? See Leo's comment in the chat there. Volunteer, serve as a host with Sobriety Engine, some examples there. And would Peer Recovery Center of Excellence ever consider the example that he provided? And that there's a ton of hosts right here in this meeting. Good. This sounds like some good synergies and examples and ideas there. Encourage you all to follow up with that and see where that goes. That's great. So I touched on most of this, but just want to reiterate why organize. Individuals and communities have needs, and individuals and communities also have skills and talent. I operate not from a deficits mindset. You might be out-resourced and outnumbered, but you do have something to bring to the table to help serve and address needs that might not be getting met sufficiently. And also, organizing enables people to turn the resources they have into power they need to make the change that they want. That's the essence of organizing. That's what it's all about there. It's challenging work, but it's meaningful work and it's impactful work. So that's kind of a summation of that. Any reactions or thoughts regarding organizing as a whole? Seeing and hearing none there.
I'll just, because I can't help myself.
Please.
I like how you put that, Coby, just in terms of like, sometimes it can feel like, oh, it's too hard to make change. It's too daunting. It's too big. But like, I think about how, like, even like as consumers, like, buyers,
Yeah.
that like I don't know where I saw this on some documentary or I read about it. This was, many years ago, but that Walmart put organic milk in their chain because people were asking for it. People wanted it. And it's, like that is our currency, is, we do have power. It might seem like, oh, what kind of difference can I make as one person? But it is what's at the heart of, social movements and social change. And then there's also the Margaret Mead quote.
Yes.
You know what it is, Coby?
I'm gonna on the spot butcher it, but a small group of people, paraphrasing, can make a difference, I think is the gist of it. And that is the power of organizing is people. You gave great examples of that, finding out how to finding one another, honoring one another, listening to one another, and then, mobilizing from there. That is the power that of organizing is people.
Yes, here it is. Margaret Mead, she says, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has.
Well said. Yes. Here's some examples or guidance on how to identify leaders. And this kind of speaks more directly to one-on-ones that you would, might conduct interactions with. Moral and ethical integrity kind of goes without saying, but they're I'd say that they're fighting the good fight. They're about the people, the cause, the issue, not about themselves. That they're moral and ethical. Skin in the game is something as well. I think that you say lived experience is another way of saying that, but that they also the outcome matters, and it matters to and for them. Maybe directly, personally, maybe it's within the family, maybe it's within the community, but they are actually going to walk the talk. That's really important. Unfortunately, there's a lot of charlatans, just in the world in general, but in community engagement work. And I encourage people just to be thoughtful about who and why you engage with, and who is really with you in your movement. Expressing compassion, serving the needs of both individuals and larger social causes. Really what that gets at is that it's not so much just me, as long as I'm fine, then, because that's really a temporary ally or supporter. Once they get their very specific need, and you probably won't see or hear from them again, or they won't engage, that really is that doesn't do the movement, doesn't do the cause justice. So kind of speaks to skin in the game, but more specifically that they are affected by an issue, but also they see how that issue has ramifications beyond them. That's really the gist of that. Actively involves and learns from others. This experience is a beautiful example of that. I've been engaged in this in various levels on, local, state, national, touching some global stuff, consultant, legislative affairs. I'm still learning. I still learn. I want to learn. I want to stay sharp, and I don't know everything. So really being humble. This work requires being humble. Yes, you're the expert of your experience. What does the process look like? Maybe, can you learn about a process, or can someone who's an expert at a process learn from your experience? So actively learning and being humble and receptive and vulnerable to do that. and also revealing little to no ambition for personal possessions, privileges, position, or power. So, people aren't in this work just for attention, which I always find very interesting, because I queued up with examples in the beginning. None of those movements, no movement was popular in the moment. It just flat out wasn't. It was not whatsoever. So there really isn't a whole lot of glamour in this work, but some might see that, it might be pursuing that, and that's why they get involved in it. So really just caution being on the lookout for that and not falling subject to that either. And those people usually wind up disappointed, because again, there's most of the historical figures and movements that I can rattle off, and thousands that unfortunately names are unknown. They suffered, to put it mildly. And just to be cognizant that can come with the territory, but more specifically to really police and check those who might be pursuing kind of glamour as you conduct this work. So that's comments or reactions with this particular slide on leadership. I often describe leadership as sacrifice. That's ultimately what it is. You oftentimes don't see it, particularly in the Western world, described or articulated in that way. Leadership is ultimately about some sort of sacrifice. It's not about being in the lights. The lights are hot. And I love Leo's comment as well. Pure recovery is the butterfly effect. Well said. Well said. One small flap can change the course of a lot of things. Shifting gears just a bit, but kind of not really. Want to talk about D, E, and I, which the topic has been really incorporated throughout a lot of the content, and you have a session coming up that's kind of more specific to this. Again, this is a topic where I've spent days, training and in workshops on, so we won't certainly have the time to dive into it, but definitely wanted to put some food for thought out there, some definitions, as well as dispel some myths. So DEI itself is a term that really didn't go mainstream until 23 months ago. Most folks weren't familiar with it, and therefore certainly were not involved in it. That's just an inconvenient truth. In my world, we simply call it social justice, but I know that phrase doesn't quite resonate throughout organizations and individuals. Never mind the fact that the last line of the Pledge of Allegiance is liberty and justice for all, but that's another topic for another day. DE&I is a term. I like to think of it as a verb. By itself, it does not describe any specific group. I repeat, DE&I does not describe any specific group. A lot of times I get calls and emails, hey, Coby, we want to do DEI engagement. We want to, and I don't know what the hell that means. That's not specific. It is, again, I describe it as a verb. DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Many folks might be more familiar with D&I, or diversity and inclusion. Really, the essence of diversity and inclusion was all about assimilation. Many individuals and organizations have mastered that. DE&I is arguably kind of the opposite of that, whereas assimilation is really conditional tolerance is how I describe it. DE&I is really, I'll provide a definition shortly here, of something different. So I wanted to really define it and dispel what it is and what it isn't. DE&I is like saying transportation. That's great. That's a method. The other 8 things listed there would be saying the method of transportation is getting more specific, it's more meaningful. And more often than not, D, E, and I is used to describe these 8 social identifiers. You might see different versions of this, but sometimes different synonyms. The names can be a little, or the terms can be a little bit different depending on the individual or organization that you're working with. However, this is kind of generally what they get at. You have ability, which speaks to mental or physical ability. Mental being cognitive, physical being, physical. You have age. You have ethnicity. Ethnicity is a social construct, which means it was made up by people, historically a dominant culture, dominant population, but it basically is a meta category of groups with shared experiences, shared sometimes geography, shared language. There's some type of commonality with ethnicity. It can be a bit of a foggier term because it's made up, but that's generally what it gets at. We also have gender, we have race, we have religion or spirituality, we have sexual orientation, and we have social economic status, AKA class. So why does all this matter? Well, I think it's a good thing to be cognizant of and to be aware of. But these are social identifiers that are reflected within our communities, be it community within the peer recovery space, maybe in your specific neighborhood. There's different ways to define community, but these are different identifiers that are reflective in there. And oftentimes they're the most marginalized depending on where you fall within each one of these categories. So these are 8 categories. Within each one, different groups have power and others don't have power. So it's good to be cognizant of that in terms of who is and maybe isn't reflected in your movement, maybe who is and isn't at the table, and to be thoughtful of, maybe why that is and how to get to them in a respectful way. One final comment, again, this is literally hours worth of content that I'll share, is that you have 8 there. By far, race cuts across and throughout each one of those, night and day. We have gender as an example that absolutely, particularly if you do not identify as a male, gender, you're marginalized. I identify as a male. If you do not do so, you're more marginalized than others. If you are specifically, for example, female, but if you are a Black female, it's a completely different story. Race cuts across these. It was government sanctioned and publicly supported. And within each one of these identifiers, they have their own issues internally, not just with the majority society respective to that identifier. They also have internal issues with race specifically. So wanted to bring that to light, and so that folks are cognizant of it. The DE&I term is out there, but oftentimes it's misused. It's used to, as a way to not, it's either used in a way due to lack of knowledge or sometimes to intentionally dilute whom people want to specifically talk about. So if you want to engage, for example, the Black community, the Latino community, then say that. Don't just say I would advise the DE&I community. That doesn't say anything. When I go, to my family's house, we don't say, "Hey, I remember the DE&I community." So be specific, because being specific is how you actually, it's respectful, and that's how you can actually pinpoint other allies or folks in need to help you with your issue. Pause there. Any comments, questions, reactions?
I have a quick comment. I just want to call back to Leo's earlier comment about, addiction is like water. It's in everything, every organization, every community, etc. And, so is racism. And I don't know if this is the right way to say this, if this is the right word, but it's interesting to me that, there are like people with substance use disorders are marginalized, but then there are people within the recovery community that are even further marginalized. So Black people, intravenous drug users, harm reduction communities. I mean, it's not an equal playing field just because, on the surface level, we're all sort of members of the recovery community, but even there are sort of sub groups, I guess, within that larger context. And it's something that we need to really pay attention to.
Well said. And, again, this is kind of, it's gone mainstream, but it's misunderstood, the term, and even, what it means. And as an example, what I'm seeing with, some funding sources, they might be coy about, they'll say DE&I, but a few are more specific. No, we mean who is the most marginalized within your marginalized community. Oftentimes it is members of the Black and Brown community, and a lot of organizations are wrestling with that. They are really wrestling, and in some cases they're not eligible for the funding because they oftentimes ignored it, or they're not ready to really address it. So specificity is a big thing. Data disaggregation is one of the, I don't know if I want to call it a movement, but something you'll hear more and more about, particularly in the funding space. But just, okay, you're talking about populations. Let's get more specific. I'm candid. Who's catching the most hell within your specific community on this specific issue? And a lot of organizations and certainly individuals are having wake-up calls on that specific item there. I'll wrap up that topic with, this is my definition or formula, if you will, for DE&I, is that it equals intentionality and accountability. Intentionality to me speaks to being specific. Again, it's the who and the why. Whereas I said diversity and inclusion, which, society, many organizations have mastered, it really revolves around assimilation. Intentionality requires effort. It requires going forth. It requires being vulnerable and maybe uncomfortable. And certainly when you're going into, if you feel that way, just imagine how the others do. That's one way of putting that. And the accountability piece really speaks to, in some ways, culpability, complicity, and really who is the burden on. I don't use the term minority. It's not accurate. Marginalized is in effect. It's usually by intent, and it was what was caused to people. And accountability really speaks to that. What are the terms that you're using? How are you really thinking or approaching certain communities? So that's my definition or formula, if you will, for DE&I, and to really have those conversations and to be thoughtful and intentional about it. It won't happen overnight. You won't learn it overnight. I think last week was May 4th, which is the Star Wars, may the 4th be with you, kind of, play on words. There's a lot of folks who are experts in Star Wars, experts in Star Trek, Harry Potter, Game of Thrones, all the kind of mythology, science fiction things have been around 40 years, relatively short amount of time. They're experts. They can name the planets, the culture, the people, the history. My pushback is, do the same thing for folks in communities who aren't make-believe, who have been around for much longer than 40 years. It can and should be done. And one final point is that of those 8 social identifiers, again, specifically really race and ethnicity, they usually are bicultural. That's something that oftentimes is not really considered. Bicultural meaning they function within one society, usually a dominant culture, but they have a whole culture of their own. It goes to the intentionality piece. Lean into it and learn it. Bicultural, an analogy I often give is it's kind of like being a crocodile. Crocodiles can function on land, but they prefer to be in the water. With certain groups, be respectful of that. Me personally, I can function in a society that oftentimes is hostile to me personally or culturally. Learn about the other side of that. Learn about what is the preferences, what are the tendencies. Again, that's the difference between DE&I and D&I specifically. D&I is you come to me. It's my terms, my turf, based on my comfort level. DE&I is kind of the opposite of that. It's leaning into the marginalized spaces and communities. That's a whole lot. That's might be for some a heavy topic, but for me a necessary one, and really speaks to the lens that I think really society should function as a general, but certainly when you're engaging communities, many of which have not been engaged, and by design. Again, marginalized is an effect. Anything that exists that's a Black or brown or XYZ organization exists because it wasn't included in in the others historically. So food for thought there, but I want to pause for any question, comments, or reactions on DE&I and how specifically with engagement.
Coby, there's a question in the chat from Debbie around how can we get people involved or interested in real causes. Debbie, I'm wondering if you're meaning like how do we get members of the recovery community to sort of step up and take action, become part of a work group, or do the things. Is that your question? Is that accurate?
No, not really. I was kind of going back to when Coby was talking about you've got the Star Wars experts, the Star Trek experts, the Game of Thrones experts, and he had said, get involved with these people who have been around for a long time. And I got to think, well, there's kind of a hook with those shows. There's something has interested them. So how can we interest people who would not typically be interested in our causes, people who do not have lived experiences? We want everybody to be involved to help promote recovery and get involved. So how can we, instead of just saying get involved with some of these other things, how can we get others involved? Because obviously we can't just say get involved. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. How do we excite them? How do we intrigue them? How do we pull them to us?
Yeah, well said. Good question. I think I'll touch on that on the next couple of slides coming up. And if I don't, feel free to call that out on, how to kind of generate interest in your cause. I think I'll touch on that. And specific to, populations, and the analogy I provided was an intended to be, learning other cultures. So, you might be an expert on, make-believe cultures, but, I would advise and encourage to learn cultures that are like real and, some of the first cultures literally on the planet. And to that end, what I, advise is usually to be vulnerable, to give up some of that maybe power, privilege, and comfort level, and really engage with that community on kind of their turf and their terms. And that's where I gave the kind of the crocodile analogy is, they can come to land. They do that all the time. How about, taking a dip in the lake and the river, and getting familiar with that terrain. So kind of two separate things there, but that's my advice for kind of the cultural aspect of different populations. But on kind of the what I call issue advocacy side of things, I'll touch on that momentarily here. And I will also give a plug to it's a brilliant I don't know what you call him, a scientist, professor. His name is Dr. Edwin Nichols. Edwin, Edwin, last name Nichols, Nichols. He is kind of an anthropologist. He's an expert on cultures. And he has, I call it a cultural cheat sheet called The Philosophical Aspects of Cultural Difference. Again, it's called The Philosophical Aspects of Cultural Difference. And it's a matrix where he's done research for, I think, upwards of 40 years at this point on cultural differences. And he breaks down the differences of certain groups. I'm never generalize or stereotype, but this is science-based research of the different tendencies of how groups interact within one another. You also note, I don't want to give too much away, but there's one exception of culture who functions one type of way in general, and all the rest don't. I encourage you to check that out, and it gives you some food for thought, and it's just a jumping point. He has stuff on YouTube. He's authored textbooks on this topic, but some food for thought of how to be bicultural. One group, generally speaking, isn't. All the other are and have commonalities in how typically we interact with one another, or they interact with one another. So I wanted to give a plug for that, and encourage you all to dive into that learning there. Touch on issue identification, which I think will somewhat get at the previous question of how to I think it was Jen on engage people specifically on your issue. So again, an issue is a problem with a solution, and here are some characteristics of a good problem to solve. That it's winnable. You want to do something that you can actually solve. So an example I usually give is solve world hunger. Yes, I wish we could do that today. But if that's kind of your message, that's huge, right? That's a big thing to really wrap your brain around. And how do you win that? So something that is winnable. So I'm a fan of, it was touched on in earlier sessions. We'll touch on it again during the advocacy topic. Make your issue bite-sized. What is something that can be done in a foreseeable future? Yes, your end game might be to eliminate the issue entirely, but what is something that can be done within a finite amount of time? 6 months, a year, 2 years. Make it bite-sized. So that kind of speaks to make it simple and specific. We want to do this, and this is why. That it unites people. Now, to be very clear, again, I said that with engagement, particularly with an organizing lens, you're going up against something. That's the nature of it. You are in the ring, okay? You're in the water. You're going to get wet, but it still is able to unite others, so that the issue that you're working on isn't so polarizing that pretty much no one else wants to get involved. you still might be of the minority in the grand scheme of things because you're going up against a system. However, it's still, to the quote that Nell read, it still is able to unite people to actually get involved in your issue. It affects many people. Again, if it's something that just affects, 10 people, I'm being somewhat facetious, that's not very scalable. So you want it to be something that can ultimately, in some way, form, shape, or fashion, that affects many people, because the more people that it affects, kind of the more people conceptually will care about it and support it in some type of way. And then that is also part of a larger plan that speaks to the kind of, yes, solve world hunger. I'm all about that. That's basically, you want it to be incremental. So you start small. Okay, this is what we're going to focus on. This is step one for X amount of time. There's step two. That's what we want to do next once we accomplish step one. And then we want to get to step three. Oftentimes with issue advocacy, with the best of intentions, organizations, groups, they start big. And that's where you get a lot of burnout, a lot of disappointment, because you just weren't able to crack that nut overnight, because it was just an unwieldy nut to crack. So any questions on issue identification or examples maybe that you have of where you have been involved with or seen that played out in your work?
Well, I have one. Thank you for letting me in. I came in a little late.
Welcome.
One thing that has united many in the recovery community here in Charleston, Kanawha Valley, is there was some kickback, well, not kickback, but, resistance for harm reduction. And there were some issues where a prominent person was unfortunately injured, in the neighborhood due to somebody not disposing of a needle correctly. And it kind of, escalated. And there was a group that was led by some local advocates that got many people on board to try to focus on that idea of reopening, the options of harm reduction. Some of that was tried, not to speak out of turn about that group, but some of it was tried a little under the radar, and that didn't work out well. Local officials passed certain rules in the meantime that would require a licensure to dispense, needles for harm reduction. And that kind of got snuck in underneath and got them in a little bit of trouble. But, ultimately, even though they may have been, the group may have looked like they'd lost, the ideal came across with help of other organizations that were also shut down, such as the health department and other providers in the community. Eventually, it's more open, and we're still working on it, but there is access to some help from one of the local providers. And so, they took this charge on. They decided they would take the charge on in a way that could dispense it with, but what they were doing was kind of clandestine, secret places and meetings. That's not going to work out very well. But at any rate, what I found was, this group is really good at organizing and building a coalition of concerned groups and individuals that has really helped motivate some change and some sympathy to the recovery community, which to some degree is, taking a little bit of a bashing with some stigma and some misunderstanding. So anyway, I just thought I'd share that. I saw them organize and do really well, and then, kind of go underneath the radar, and that didn't work out very well. So, doing things up front in the open probably speaks a lot to the credibility, even though it's a highly credible group, that it made them look, maybe question their credibility at the time. Thanks for letting me share.
Yeah, thank you. That's a fantastic example. And yeah, that unfortunately happens a lot. Sometimes just, lack of awareness, well intended, and sometimes, referencing an earlier slide, organizations, they kind of I'm not saying that this is necessarily the case, they kind of sell out, so to be cognizant of that, and sometimes challenging process, that's something to organize around. Maybe you don't quite know what the solution is yet. Fair enough. But if you can, sometimes challenging process is something to organize around unto itself. So that was a great example that you provided there. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
One final slide to wrap things out, and I always source and credit my resources, and I try to provide the best that I am personally familiar with, aware of, and a fan of. And this one is from Stanford Social Innovation Review. They have a lot of free content, resources, and even webinars just on engagement stuff in general. A lot of scientists and studies that they provide, but it's not all kind of the wonkish stuff either. So this is an example from there of how to make a difference, and some things to think through on what's called cutting an issue, which is really just identifying a specific issue that you want to address. And it kind of speaks to the butterfly effect too. That's why I love that was dropped in the chat previously. So good things to maybe focus on as you define what's the specific issue that you want to work on. Where's there pent up energy for change? Where is energy disrupting the status quo, or trying to recognize and cause new patterns, behavior, or to emerge? So where are people really anxious and excited to change something? That's something to think about. Ripple effects kind of more specifically speaks to the butterfly effect. Where are there strong factors and dynamics which have the potential to affect many other factors or dynamics downstream? That's why I'm a fan of starting small. Start small with the intentions of going bigger, but start small. What's that pebble that you can throw in the creek, in the river, that will reverberate and cause other impact? That's why where I encourage groups to kind of think through that. And also bright spots. Where is positive change already happening? This might also be effective hack that you could scale. So where might you be able to piggyback on work that's happening within your specific space, or completely different? I'm a big fan of coalitions. You don't necessarily always have to work specifically within, the peer recovery space. Maybe you can partner up with other efforts that have an aligned interest. I can't speak specifically to this space, but I know with a lot of healthcare movement, particularly 10-ish years ago, a lot of that was happening, and it was beneficial. You had a lot of groups who didn't ordinarily work together. They weren't subject experts on one another's specific topic area, but they had an aligned interest. Hey, if this thing works, we all stand to gain from it. So that was a bright spot, which is oftentimes beneficial for partnerships and collaborations. So any questions, comments, reactions to that slide or any others, I will certainly welcome them verbally and or in the chat. And I'll leave you all with this quote from Unknown. Hard work is hard work. Again, hard work is hard work, but it does matter. It makes a difference. And I thank everyone for any contribution that they have ever made, past, present, or in the future for social impact. With that, I will pause for comments, questions. Otherwise, I'll turn it over to Nell.
Thank you, Coby. We are out of time, so we're going to wrap it up, but thank you. I thought this was really great, and just, you know, you gave us a lot to think about, and I was taking all these notes, and I'm going to be thinking about this further. And thanks everyone for coming and for your comments and your participation in the chat. Your questions really makes this whole experience even more rich. I just want to plug, I want to give you all a heads up to watch your emails, because we are doing what we're calling extensions work in between the monthly sessions that we're doing as part of this learning collaborative. So there's going to be kind of more stuff coming your way around the topic of community and stakeholder engagement. So watch for those. They will come across your inbox. And I encourage you to follow up with me or Chris. You can reach out to us directly or through the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence website. We would love to have any follow-up conversations if you all have more to talk about. But thank you again for being here, and hope to see you at the next one. Remember, these sessions are kind of building on each other. So we'll see you at the second Thursday in June. Right?
Thanks. I appreciate y'all.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.